Good morning. I'm Warren Hogue, IPI's Senior Advisor for External Relations, and I'm happy to welcome you to this Global Leaders Series presentation featuring Astrid Thors, the High Commissioner on National Minorities for the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Established in 1992 as a conflict prevention instrument, Ms. Thors' office provides early warning and intervention to prevent inter-ethnic tensions related to national minorities from escalating into conflict. She was named to the post in August of 2013, and during her time in office, the OSCE region has been facing increasingly complex security challenges, from border management issues to the current large influx of migrants, resulting in societal tensions that have drawn the world's attention. At the moment, Europe faces a great test of preserving the stability of its increasingly ethnically diverse societies, and Ms. Thors' office is involved in the extensive migrant integration effort. Among the subjects Ms. Thors will be addressing is how the OSCE can improve its ability to detect early warning signs and take more effective measures to prevent violations of minority rights and interstate disputes over minority issues. There are many obstacles to achieving greater cohesion and stability in the region, among them nationalist movements, a tendency to securitize minority issues, and simmering inter-ethnic disputes in post-conflict societies. You have her biography on the list of participants you have, but let me introduce her just briefly for the benefit of those following this by video. Prior to her appointment to the OSCE post, she was for 9 years a member of the Finnish Parliament, serving at one point as the Minister of Migration and European Affairs, and in the 8 years before that, a member of the European Parliament. She will speak for about 15 minutes on the key aspects of her conflict prevention work, such as her promotion of robust integration policies and the protection of minority rights. And then we'll go to the floor and take your comments and questions. So please join me in welcoming to IPI Astrid Thors, the OSCE High Commissioner on National Minorities.
Yes. Well, thank you for the warm welcoming words, and thank you for being here this little bit chilly morning. But it's a pleasure being here, and we know also that my immediate predecessor, my esteemed predecessor, Knut Wallebeck, has also been here and speaking, I understand, on integration of diverse societies. You had a seminar here, so it is. I feel that I am among an audience who knows much more than the average about both the OSCE and the position of the High Commissioner. Thank you for the introduction, and it's my just duty to little bit, compliment and to say some words which are special for the High Commissioner on National Minorities, because sometimes I feel that the High Commissioner is really a quite unique animal. We quite often get questions, couldn't you little bit export this model to other parts of the world where you have this inter-ethnic tension, a very, very serious inter-ethnic tension. Anybody who follows, for instance, any news reporting of Human Rights Watch, the crisis group, the minority rights group, you see how many very serious questions. Or we have had elections in Asia where we have seen that. But now the institution was established in 1992 in Helsinki. I must admit, I come from Helsinki, and you will hear Helsinki more also in this speech, because as you know, Helsinki has been a crucial place for the first Helsinki Final Act, 1975. May I say that there were two persons there which my mother remember very well, Bishop Makarios and Prime Minister Trudeau. I think we can relate to them in two ways, Cyprus being once more very much on the international agenda. So established in 1992, too. And of course, when you look at the 90s, you had the breakup of several multinational countries, especially Yugoslavia. You had bloody conflicts, and you had also the breakup of the Soviet Union, where in many cases the borders that had not been so visible before and had not had that importance became important, and you would have a group of people living in a country where they did not know the main or the state language, and the language of interethnic communication, whatever called, had been Russian. So that's we feel was the background that the delegates then in Helsinki once more in 1992 established this institution to engage, as we say, in early warning and early action to prevent interethnic tensions from leading to conflict. So the emphasis when we work and when we talk in our work is really conflict prevention, preventative diplomacy, and also done in a quiet, confidential way, given often the sensitive nature of issues relating to minorities and minority disputes. The English language is a fantastic language for compromise because you have such a wealth of words. And I'm emphasizing that the High Commissioner on national minorities, not for national minorities. It is actually not easily translated into Finnish, which says vähemmistövaltuutettu, which gives a little bit of a long impression. And when in Swedish it said högkommissionär angående nationella minoriteter, a very clausy way of expressing that. So on or for, English language is a good diplomatic language. But it's the on we intend to say we are not an ombudsman, but a conflict prevention. I use, as I said, methods of quiet diplomacy and recommendations to participating states, as we say in the OSCE, to facilitate dialogue, to raise awareness, also in the international community. It is, as you know, that OSCE is an institution where consensus is the principle for decision making. It was, for instance, necessary to reach consensus between all 57 participating states to deploy the special observation mission to Ukraine. And it was a good when that was happening in 2014. But in my case, where the institution is engaged is according to the judgment of the High Commissioner, and that is an expression of the independence of the institution. And we are distinguishing often in the OSCE between the three institutions who can get engaged without the consent of the Permanent Council. My sister and brother, if I may say so, is ODIHR, Office of Democracy and Human Rights, and representative of the freedom of media. These are our sister and our brother. Also, national minorities are not defined in the mandate. And you can see that often your national minorities are not defined in international instruments because it has been difficult to define them. And sometimes it means, when my title, that part, means sometimes an obstacle for the engagement, because groups say we are not minorities, but we are a community. And that's an obstacle which I hope we can overcome in situations when it's necessary, because in a country with several communities, you are working with the question of diversity and how to live together, integrate the diversity. So that is one of the examples that could, of the also challenges we have. I have the pleasure of having had three distinct predecessors. I mentioned the immediate predecessor, Knut Vollebæk, of Norwegian diplomat, and very well known here in the Institute and in US and in UN in general. Before that, we had the Swedish diplomat Rolf Ekéus, and the first High Commissioner was Max van der Stoel, the great Dutch diplomat. that because he was the first one, we are based in The Hague, while other OSCE institutions are based in Vienna. And let me use this small moment to market one thing. We have the pleasure of giving the Max van der Stoel Award to an organization that has promoted minority rights and inclusion, and every second year. And we are just now, the last 2 weeks of nominations for that, we have had the pleasure of being able to award very distinguished organizations like the Nansen Dialogue Center, working to integrate young people through education in many parts of the world. We have awarded last time an organization called Spravedlivost in Kyrgyzstan, working with access to justice and giving justice to human rights defenders, to minorities, just as mentioning 2 examples of very distinguished organizations. Those who can make the nominations are OSCE participating states and the OSCE institutions and so-called OSCE missions in the field. But any tip of a good nominee that you would know that has, for instance, done good work to promote understanding between people is one that we cannot reward enough in these difficult years. But I mentioned my predecessors because they have their experience, their wealth of experience on how to manage diversity is very valuable for the institution. And the experience also says that the protection and promotion of rights of persons belonging to national minorities is really the essence and foundation of stable societies. We can say that since the Copenhagen document of OSCE 1990, which was a groundbreaking document in this area, then it was followed by UN document, the declaration later, we have got a legal framework also that has been strengthened in the last 2 decades, and this is a kind of a benchmark that we use. There are bodies who are monitoring the OSCE area, and especially the Council of Europe countries, how this legal framework is working. They are often saying what should be done, but we are trying to help participating states to say how this could be done in practice. And dear friends, rule of law and good governance, they are so central. I would like to define in a way that if you do not protect and take into consideration the rights of minorities, the rights of persons belonging to national minorities, then you do not have a good governance. Because then you are not having all in society having the right to participation, having the right to give their contribution to a society. But on the other hand, without rule of law, it's quite often difficult to have enforcement of these rights and to have them work in practice. So I hope that anywhere when also rule of law, let's say, benchmarks are set up, discussed, the minority questions need to be there. And so that good governance, in practice, it means that minority and minority all are able to participate in political, economic, cultural and social life of their countries. Means addressing structural and other barriers that exist to participation. Another thing where we are, I think many participating states, many countries in the world are struggling how to create sense of belonging, civic identity in a country. Is it based on ethnic bonds only, or could we have really that everybody feels as citizens of this country? This is a core of our work. We might address some issues then in the question and answer session among that. We have countries who are positive, who are engaging, who are trying really to integrate their minorities. But we can also observe quite many other countries who says just, in our legislation is said everyone has equal opportunities and no one is discriminated against. That I find as often as a minimalist approach, and then it's a sign to me when I hear this that we have it in legislation, nothing else needs to be done. It can be a sign that here the challenge is of integrating communicating between different groups is not taken seriously, and the integration is not working. So the integration, inclusive, just societies, we are trying to help participating states in that work. And we are proud to say that during Knut Wallebeck's tenure as High Commissioner, and I think he was introducing also the Ljubljana Guidelines on Diverse Societies here in this institution. This is a very good tool, and I think very interesting to use in mutatis mutandis in many situations in countries where you have and struggling with diversity. To look at how also the sense of belonging in a country can be strengthen the trust between communities and the trust in that authorities will take the interest of all into account. Today's world, unfortunately, we see also that even though we saw positive development in the 90s with the Copenhagen document, the Council of Europe document, we can see a situation where maybe minority questions are more bilateralized and not on the multilateral platform. An international institution, bilateralized kin states are working for their so to say, as they consider being their minority in another country. And that is not a order which is, equal and which not necessary in situations. They can also be used, this bilateralism, in order to destabilize. There can be, we are trying to say there can be good bilateral mechanisms, but they also misused these minorities and in that way create a, let's say, go against the international law. And we have also seen very, very blunt breaches of these principles. The High Commissioner on National Minorities, do I have any awards? Do I have any carrots, any sticks? I must admit that this question, it is like in diplomacy, in general, as such, there is not, I have not a force to enforce some things. But during the years, of course, there are other mechanisms that create the interest of countries behaving well, and for countries in the European, wanting to achieve the European Union, that has been a real carrot for them. And also countries having an association agreement with the European Union, they have also mentioned minority issues, and that has also being taken up as a carrot. But finally, the one which I think hopefully would be the most convincing is the question of the self-interest of the country. It is, you create a stable society when you create conditions where minorities can participate and feel that they are part of the country. We try to show through pilots, to projects. We are not a project organization, we are a tiny organization, but we try to show this is the way forward. And when you have an example, we share this with good practices. And that is also a useful way of doing that. Creating examples on how the minority can be better at integration to education, to learning the state language, institutions that are for interethnic discussion, good participation. But why am I here? And why am I on the other side of the Atlantic? It's exactly to reach out to other parts of the international community, because a good cooperation with other international actors, as we have in the field and as they had at different level with the United Nations, with Council of Europe, that is also of utmost importance, that we try to give the same messages, and get the support of the other organs. Dear friends, you mentioned migration flows. You mentioned you mentioned other things on the agenda of the international communities. But migration flows, violent extremism, hybrid warfare. These are on the high part of the agenda of the international community. And maybe then when I come and talk about integration and language rights, maybe this is now at a lower priority. But actually, dear friends, all these factors also have an implication for the situation of minorities and for the conciliation efforts, for the integration in society. Migration flows have heated up nationalistic rhetoric, and rhetoric that makes integration more difficult, undermines efforts to build the sense of belonging that is so central. Hybrid warfare is used as an excuse to sometimes to close off information channels that can be very important for minorities to access culture in their language. And migration flows also can affect the, let's say, not so yet stable societies, and old wounds will come to the forefront once more. And so this is things that actually influence very much the work. Dear friends, when we look upon a buzzword, I have noticed the buzzword here in New York and the UN, the buzzword, the emphasis is so much on prevention. We have, when I look at the high-level report on peacekeeping operations, the World Humanitarian Forum, efforts to make prevention more efficient, and the realization that it's so much more costly when you go to peacekeeping operation compared to do prevention work. Let me, in a humble way, say that maybe my institution has some experience to share, that it is so much worth to look at situation where giving multilingual or bilingual education to a group that has grievances with education could prevent conflicts from further breaking up. And 1 ounce of prevention is so much more cost effective than the same ounce then used for instance, peacekeeping, not to think others. So I would just with these words say that our experience on also when really taking early action before an early warning is even needed is that which is very much also the essence of our work. When I compare how early warnings are discussed, we are an early action. Our institution is maybe a little bit a stage before when what we talk about early action is a stage before when early warning would be needed. So in these words, thank you once more for inviting me. Thank you for coming, and I hope that you see that the methods of our working, methods of working in prevention, in early action, based on a human rights approach, has something that could be supported, should be supported, and good ideas hopefully can be shared regarding a work. And don't forget the Max van der Stoel Award. So thank you for your attention.
I'm going to find out their questions and comments here, but let me just ask you a few things on my own. You mentioned The Hague and you mentioned Max van Stoel. This is the year that we're marking the 20th anniversary of the Hague recommendations on education rights of minorities. And I want to ask you, and I do have a particular focus right now on the migrant integration in Europe that's going on right now because the numbers are so large and the challenge is so great. What are what are the aspects? Well, first of all, how much can you get in your agency get involved in that? And secondly, on education rights, what are the thoughts about how you create education that will integrate minorities into the societies they're joining?
First of all, I mean, when we have migrants or newcomers, our focus has traditionally been with my communities that have been living in their environment for a long time. So we have not yet been engaged, in migrant integration. But it's when you mentioned this Hague recommendation, and if you would go to the website of the institution, you will find both the Hague recommendation and the Ljubljana guidelines, which actually some of the principles, especially in Ljubljana guidelines, can be applied also for newcomer institutions. But of course, the educational situation is different. When you have, for instance, you are going for a bilingual education entirely or gradually, but some of the principles gradually increasing the language of the state where the migrant has come. I think there are some of those principles that could be discussed. We had, but as you said, the Hague recommendations to 20 this year, and last week we had a fantastic, if I may say myself, fantastic event bringing together practitioners, diplomats, participating states, educationers, and we discussed also diversity in their education in general. First of all, when we are talking about education, no changes are quick. And they cannot be quick, and you cannot switch very quickly, from one system to other, because you need to have teachers trained. If I may say, from what I have learned from these practitioners, especially in the education sector, the attitude of the teacher is so central. That is shown in some Western European countries who have had a long migrant population. Is it very much an emphasis that one language is superior, very much superior, above the culture that the child represents? Then it is possible that education results are less good. That is one thing. I think also from my, let's say, previous experience, I think there is one thing that is always important in integration, and that is to ensure that the mother learns the language of the new country, so that she is not left behind. Because as in any education, a woman that has education, her children will also get educated. And if she feels outside, and often countries have had language education in a way that is not suitable for a mother with children who need to take care of children. We must organize the language education so that the mother also can benefit in the same way as the other in the family coming to a new country. But as I said, we have not been engaged as an institution in this, but we see we are following closely from the point of conflict prevention, how migration flows influence the groups that are residing, and societies that maybe have still quite big grievances between groups and where reconciliation has not happened.
Excellent. You mentioned the buzzword prevention, and you're absolutely right. It comes up in all aspects of UN work and studies of UN work these days. There's another buzz phrase, and this is letters, and the letters are SDG. And I wondered if and one of them, for instance, goal number 4 is all about education. But how do you relate to the SDGs? Do they help your work? Do they give you guidance?
When I saw the final outcome, I could have been one of the happiest persons. As equally happy are those who had been negotiating for long hours here in New York. Because the word inclusive appears in so many of the goals. It appears so many, and so let's say you cannot achieve the goals without taking into account minorities, national minorities, disabled, and different ethnicities. You cannot achieve them. The challenge is that if I may be very direct, as is the Nordic tradition, minorities are not explicitly mentioned, and indigenous people are mentioned in the SDGs. And I think we have here a situation where there is a little bit like anxiety to touch minority question, because we have such a strong message from the governors of different countries in the world that minorities are separatists, they are potential terrorists, looked through the security prism. So I can see that there is in quite many international organizations a little bit of we do not want to touch minorities. But in other SDGs, there's mention that as must reach all despite ethnicity, language. So indirectly, minorities are mentioned. And the challenge is now, of course, how will the development be measured? Will there be developed on the national level, on the and regional and international level, indicators that would show what the progress is? And we know that there's going on a debate on that. But I have encouraged some of the countries we are working with and who have adopted for instance, an integration strategy for their minorities and regarding the society, and they have said they need also to have indicators. Why not do the same work at the same time? So when you need to have national indicators for integration of society, they can be used as part of the implementation. Because the countries are free to choose different ways of implementing. Please have integration strategies as part of the implementation of the SDGs. And you mentioned education, but also access to justice. Access to justice is mentioned, and we see a situation when minorities have really barriers to access to justice, especially if there have been violent events.
Excellent. I'd love to get some questions from people. If you just raise your hand, I will call on somebody. And here in the second row, if you please. And if you just identify yourself, please. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Jans Marjaks. I'm the PR of Latvia at the United Nations. I must confess I felt slightly nostalgic because 20 years ago, for some 5 years, I had the privilege of interacting quite closely with your predecessor's office, with Astrid Thors' office, which I think in our case was exactly the case of self-interest in more than one ways for addressing some very challenging issues. I would have two questions. One is you mentioned the hybrid warfare that shouldn't be used as excuse for closing information channels. Well, first of all, from your perspective, do you think that there is such a thing as hybrid warfare, and if it does, how would you suggest addressing that? My second question would be, you were mentioning just your broad mandate. I would be intrigued by how you would assess your office's success rate with respect to Crimea, which, in my humble opinion, is a situation where a complicated situation is getting more complicated by, if not by day, then by week. Thank you.
Would you like to take that question?
Yeah. Well, you have, in a way, you could say that hybrid warfare is not necessarily something very new, because in a way you could say, I mean, what do we really define by hybrid warfare? Maybe I must take back in this way, but of course there are some new tools that to stop information, to have denial of service attacks, things like that. But when I think about mostly is the question that some people want to close off because of content, some TV channels, and here I think we are in difficult waters, because free access to information is one other commitment that we have in the OSCE, and if you are not, isn't it the best way to try to have as open discussion and to provide information from your point of view instead of closing off some channels? That would be my answer, and to ensure that there is information on your country in language that everybody in the country understands as much as possible. That this would be my answer to some parts of this kind of discussion. As to the office's success rate in Crimea, as you are rightly saying, the office has been for all the existence actually engaged with Crimea, and when in situations where there were not that many others who were engaged. We know that the first High Commissioner was very instrumental in establishing the autonomy for Crimea, and really mediating. That's one of the most famous mediation efforts by the office. And then my predecessor continued to follow the situation in Crimea when maybe not many others were doing, and especially the situation of the formerly deported persons from Crimea, because we know the 44 deportations were mostly of the Crimean Tatar people, but there were also some other nationalities that were deported. Return started in the 80s, late 80s, and there was a legal system in place, but not resources and the legal system for return for IDPs, formerly deported people, was not efficient anymore in the early 2010s. So we have been having had concerns that when you have a situation when land rights, property rights, support for reintegration of the Crimean Tatar was going down, was one source also of anxiety before events in February and March 2014, at a time when not many others were. I mean, that was under Kiev rule clearly. I don't want to say any success rate to the question now, because you could also say that some of the provisions on the autonomy stopped to really function also before February 2014. They were not, let's say that they were not actually really respected in February 2014. That could be noted. Now we have, as we know, the new reality, and we have been observing in good cooperation with the OSCE's monitoring mission in Ukraine in general. We have been observing the situation in let's say adjacent areas to Crimea, and we have also done a human rights assessment on Crimea, where actually some of the predictions that we said that there is a possibility that there will be further crackdown on those who do not, those community, and especially the Crimean Tatar community that does not want to accept the new political reality. And I think we all are aware of a decision which banned the Crimean Tatar self-governing body, the Mejlis, earlier this week. The institution and the representative, the human rights representative, the chairman in office, just the other day issued also a concern about what this can mean for the Crimean Tatar community, and also from, let's say, from the view of creating even new tensions in Crimea and around Crimea.
Can I just follow up that question to ask you something about how your office functions? You have acknowledged right now that there's a potential crackdown on Tatars in Crimea. Obviously, that is something your agency would not like. How can you, are you able to speak publicly? Do you work quietly behind the scenes to bring influence on a situation like that?
In this situation, I think there are, the added value hopefully is understood of my institution is to try to work behind the scenes as much as possible, because we have monitoring bodies and human rights institutions that can express publicly, and also working together typically with the chairman in office in this situation. So that's why we noted that the human rights representative of the chairman in office of the German foreign ministry just recently expressed concern what will be these tensions. But we are trying to also continue to follow what are the next actions to this, because it can really lead to increased tension, and also we could have effects on the, let's say, the some parts of how secure the community does feel itself in there.
Excellent. I think I have a question in the front row. Actually, I've got 3 questions, so we'll take 3 at once.
Yep.
Start with Maureen, and then John, and then Sally.
So good morning, Maureen Quinn from the International Peace Institute. Thank you very much for your presentation. 2 things you said caught my attention, and so I thought, I'd like to hear a little bit more on them. You talked about how national minorities are not defined, and often they see themselves as communities. And then later on at a different, or maybe I didn't get the right order, you talked about how, if I understood correctly, a minority mechanism can be misused. So I'll start with the second one. Did I understand you correctly as a minority mechanism being misused? And could you give an example or explain what you meant by that? And then for the first one, when you said this, that national minorities are not defined, often they see themselves as communities, it reminded me a lot of the kind of things that we've heard when we've talked about today's humanitarian crisis, that you need to obviously support the refugees, the internally displaced people, but you need to do that as well and support the host communities. So if you could talk about those 2 points a little bit more, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
If you can keep that notes, and we'll go to John Hirsch.
Thank you very much. I'm John Hirsch. I'm also with IPI. I wanted to ask you to say something about the situation in Serbia between the government and the Muslim community. A year ago, or a little less than that, there was in the trusteeship chamber here a commemoration of the Srebrenica massacre. About 100 member states showed up. In the Security Council, a few days later, Russia blocked a resolution acknowledging the Srebrenica massacre, even though, if I'm not mistaken, the Prime Minister of Serbia had gone down there, and he encountered a lot of difficulty, actually, by the families of the victims. So is your office involved in circumstances such as those arising in the aftermath of the Srebrenica massacre? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take a 3rd question. Sally?
Sally Cater, thank you very much. It's very important subject, especially now.
Sally, could you identify your organization?
Yeah.
Because I think it would be interesting.
I had an organization, it's called the U.S. Federation for Middle East Peace and Sustainable Development, another one. So a few years ago, I was asked to speak in Sweden, in Stockholm, to immigrant women. There's a group, it's called RIFI. And at that time, also several officials came from women, it's all women, from Finland as well. And it was 2 days event, and it was extremely wonderful. And I came out with an impression of how Sweden have treated the immigrants in their country. And I have since had gone a couple of times more, and they've integrated very, very well in the country. Now, this also the situation in few other European countries, but not all countries. This is what we have seen being talked about in France, for instance. The other one I would like to understand now is that with the refugees from Syria, there's a large number that came to Sweden and had put more pressure, obviously, on the Swedish life and government and health. So I would like to see what your intake about the refugees, specifically the Syrian. One more point I would like to add, talking about fairness in courts. I also belong to a group here in the United States, and they're called the Consortium for Fairness for Ethnic and Minority in the U.S. courts. And they're doing a great job. So maybe this is something that you might look into. Thank you.
Ms. Thor is a lawyer, by the way, so good question. Can you start with
Yeah.
oriented questions?
Yes. Let's try to see. You have. I think first of all, thanks for the question, because it gives me a little bit of opportunity to develop this, because it's. I think we have a fairer and more a treatment against the same benchmarks if we have a multilateral and international norms that are on the basis of minority protection. And if we only have a situation where we have some bilateral things like bilateral commission, it will mean that minorities that have not a kinstand will have a less strong position. And this is typically the situation, if I may say, that we have Roma communities in some of the OSCE countries. And immediately I want to say that even though Max van der Stoel was producing the report that led to OSCE's commitments in the Roma area, the main responsible for Roma issues is Office and Democracy and Human Rights. But this is typically then we. What also concerns is that in a situation if this mechanism can be misused, and in that way that they are, let's say, support mechanisms from one country are not in accordance with international law, let's say favoring on an ethnic base, giving benefits to the minority without the knowledge of the host country. These are things which I typically see can be misused, and let's say also diverts the sense of belonging of the minority to the country where they are residing. So that is my concern on the trend that we see. It's more kind of kin states activism and not international mechanism. We see that in the 15. Maybe we are focused on this because we are not working in all 57 participating states of OSCE, but exactly situations where there has been tensions or could be tensions and conflict risks. National minorities. There are some situations where the constitution or the peace agreement does not talk about national minorities. For instance, that the population representing over 20% of the people. That is in one famous peace agreement. We have another where you talk about constituent people. Hopefully, we have a third one coming up for Cyprus. Well, also they will not necessarily talking of minorities, but in reality, they can live in municipalities or entities where they are a minority, and therefore my message would be, our institution in reality has an expertise for language legislation, for education, for training people to work in multilingual, bilingual circumstances that can be and should be used, for instance, when implementing these different agreements. That's one of our messages where we have tried to get across when we have been meeting interlocutors here. The question about Srebrenica, the question of the relation between the Serbian communities, governments, I think it's a very complex question. If I will use a little bit of a political expression, because there are on a certain level, and I would not like to restrict it only to Serbia and the Muslim population, but let's say some reactions we have seen in general when some of persons who have been indicted before the ICTY, the International Criminal Tribunal, former Yugoslavia, and they have been acquitted. That has led to some reactions between the communities, and maybe tore up some old wounds. So that would be one of the, and then you have in some parts, also a little bit of even revision of even older history. So there are situations now where for many different reasons, and including the more nationalist rhetoric on the old continent in general, where questions are raising. Specifically, we can see a situation where the Bosniak community in Serbia is divided, politically divided. That we can see also. That is a very, very specific question where that is divided. And sometimes when you have exactly a community that is divided, then you can also have, let's say, the small used for raising political scores and using the ethnic card in that way. In Bosnia-Herzegovina, where we also could have a little bit, that is where we have this dimension, the use of fear of the other is not a way. That is also in a dispute in different disputes. You still have that. And when I'm talking about Western Balkans, and my expert here, my head of section, who is closely involved, and Natasha Andonovsky, who is closely watching the situation, we are of course saying that we are not, when we are concerned about, let's say, using fear of the other and these old wounds, we are not back in the 90s, but we are backsliding from what was the situation maybe 10 years ago, when all of us were more optimistic that the countries were developing, were integrated. And sometimes integration into EU is actually the thing that keeps the country together. Integration into another promotes societal integration as well. Certainly. When we were at the beginning of the week in Washington, we had also a long discussion at the Department of Justice to learn more about the different programs that are going on in order to help access to justice and have community policing. And I think this is, when we are working with access to justice, we need to gather some of the best examples in other participating states where there has not been the conflict, but there have been local violence and local disputes that we can really learn from. So that we do it. But if you have additional context, we're very happy to hear them. But really, Syrian integration into Sweden is really let's say outside my knowledge. I would just want to say that when you see in the social media, some pictures from Sweden and some suburb burning and so, I think you can say that this is part of a well-connected anti-immigrant community that is spreading this information very well. Some years ago, everybody was talking about a place in Malmö, the town from where Zlatan, the football player in PSG, comes from. And I was saying that this Rosengård is terrible. I visited it myself to see how things were there. And they had interesting community programs so that families could establish shops in the neighborhood, and it looked at. So it's not, the picture is not as some social media are portraying it. Certainly there are situations where it's not easy, and unfortunately you can see quite often report that there's somebody who is trying to set on fire a so-called reception center for refugees, and nearly weekly you get this information. So then we should not deny that there are tensions in the society, and there's a very lively debate also inside newcomer community, women's community, what they want, because we can also see that often women migrants want really to achieve. The girls, they are very good achievers in the schools when they are given the opportunity to study in the systems in the Nordics. They are often quite good achievers.
I was thinking as you were talking how everything comes back to education. When you were talking about fear of the other, that has so much to do with how something is taught.
Yeah.
And please, any more questions? We would, Manik, fine. Anybody else? And then Barbara in the back. And is there a third? Well, we'll take these two, Commissioner.
Hi, my name is Manik Mehta. I'm a syndicated journalist. I'll follow up with the question put by Sally in regard to Syrian refugees. What do you think about the current EU-Turkey deal on the Syrian refugees? Is this a viable proposal? And is it also practical? Would you like to comment? Thank you.
And then Barbara in the back.
Hi, my name is Barbara Gibson. I'm with IPI, serving on a special commission, the Independent Commission on Multilateralism. But I have a particular fondness for the OSCE and your office in particular. Ms. Thors, thank you for your presentation. As Canadian ambassador to the OSCE, I ended my term calling your office a stealth weapon because it's so very little known, really, outside the OSCE space. But I have enormous respect for the work that you do. As part of this independent commission on multilateralism, we're looking at the role of the UN and the role of regional organizations and the interface between those two, the various regional organizations and burden sharing. Could you comment a little bit on your relationship with the UN and other regional organizations?
Very good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. First, the question on EU-Turkey deal. I think I better not comment so much about it here publicly. I better not do it because it's. I think that would be wise. We are not seeing yet, the full effects of it, and there are more. Let's say, experienced commentators. We have had the Council of Europe's Human Rights Commissioner who has been commenting on things. We have persons in the UN system who have commented from the human rights point. So that being the case, just noting that implementation takes very much time also in all the previous EU deals and how to deal with the refugee crisis. So if you understand me, the Ambassador Gibson's question on the role and the cooperation with United Nations and other regional organizations, it's as you know, at present there's often a discussion that OSCE is a Chapter 7 organization according to the UN Charter, and much talk about that. But maybe some things could really be more concrete. But on the other hand, I love a paradox. I'm saying at the lower the level of cooperation is discussed, like desk levels and country teams working, the better is the cooperation. And in reality, I mean, we are we are from my office side, we are standing often in contact when visiting the region and when trying to assess situations with the UN Center for Preventative Diplomacy in Ashgabat. There's a typical thing, and we are following closely UN mechanism, human rights mechanism. These are working tools for us as well. So there, I think, but still, I mean, it's a challenge for our institution to follow what is happening, for my institution properly, what is happening in the big UN system, because there are, as you said, the SDGs have been developed. You have the discussion on the prevention, prevention and the possible prevention forum, and that's why I hope, without good friends who understand the High Commissioner and without good friends who understand the OSCE, we cannot work efficiently. So I hope that if this talk also helps people realize, I mean, they are doing this work on diversity, they are doing this work of inclusiveness, on prevention, on early action. Could it be good to tap into their experience? This would be my final message. Please remember us for those. Think that there is an institution in the Hague that might be called upon. But on a level, I mean, also with the UNDP, Peace Building Fund has, for instance, been very important to implement some of the ideas that we have been supporting in Kyrgyzstan. So UNICEF support, we are cooperating with UNICEF as much as possible, because they have the capacity to implement ideas that could be useful, and to have a cooperation so that their ideas and our ideas are not in conflict. I think that is also very, especially in the area of education, that is important, that our ideas are not going in contradiction. May I also say that the way the World Bank is now trying to do a conflict analysis of how their projects might affect minority communities is also very important and should be implemented more, because that is a good, taken into account what that we have too often seen that some big projects, as we see in different parts, sometimes is affecting in a very negative way the livelihoods of also national minorities and indigenous people.
Oh, very good. I was going to say, if there's no more hands, thank you for your...
Thank you. My name is Jouni Laaksonen and I'm the DPR from Finland. I'd like to ask about the role of women in the conflict prevention and the peace processes, because that's something we try to promote a lot here at the political level in New York, but can you see results in the field, that there are more women in the peace processes and in conflict prevention, and what could be done better if you don't see the results? Thank you.
Well, we are of course also eagerly implementing the gender action plan of the OSCE. At the moment, I think we can see that we have a quite gender sensitive delegation of 4 ladies here today. So it's, but we have been trying to in our work to have a gender perspective, and to see, especially in let's say in early warning, what are issues that could be issues that are gender sensitive and could be used as indicators. That's one part of our work. And the second is, we are also, when we are talking about integration, you should also have integration policies gender sensitive, because some measures are better suited than others. We are in real, let's say, in some mediation situations, so I have not yet seen how much it has been taken into account, because there have not. I cannot point equally concretely to example as to this. I mean, early, let's say, early warning, conflict indicators, and then being conscious that the policies we are implementing, we should take this factor and to analyze before we put some policy in practice.
Seeing no more questions, I just want to say and finish, thank you very much, Ms. Thors, for coming here and talking to us. And I guess we should all wish you best of luck, because it's a very difficult situation you're in the midst of. Thank you.